Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Welcome to another episode of the Work From Home Show. This is your host, Adam Schrader, along with my co-host, Naresh Vissa. We have been talking this week about podcasting, and we've talked before about why you should podcast, about how to find the correct niche for your podcast in order to become successful, but we haven't really dove into the specifics, the how to specifically start your podcast. What steps do you need to take? So that's what we're going to do today. So Naresh, how do you start the podcast?
Surprisingly, it's not a complicated process. A friend of mine, he called me after hearing this podcast, and he was like, "Oh, so did you guys get funding for your show?" And I said, "Yeah, I got $100." And he was confused.
$100, man, you spent a lot of money.
I said, "Yeah, I self-funded it for $100." And he said, "Oh, well, that's because you work in the space. You got people to do you favors and this and that." And I said, "No. If you read my book, Podcastnomics, you'll see that you very likely have a lot of the equipment already. A bulk of the software and technology is free. And starting a podcast the right way, maybe not $100, maybe like $200, but it's still not this idea that you need to go out and get investors and get funding and raise $200,000, which is just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous."
Yeah, it's amazing to me. One of the things I would suggest is if you're going to do this and you're wanting to start it is, for the love of all that's good, do not join a podcast Facebook group. Do not do it. Those people will tell you, I mean, let me put this in perspective for people. I've talked about it before. I've been editing and producing podcasts for over a decade. I've done, 1,500 to 2,500 podcasts produced. I am currently talking to you on a $30 USB microphone, and I sound fine. Is it the best thing ever? No, but it's a podcast. It doesn't have to be. I mean, people are spending, there are people who are doing it as a hobby. They're spending $300, $400, $500 on a microphone, and then they buy this mixer board that costs $300, and they buy this and they buy that, and they're building this studio in their home. And
that's a popular thing. The studio, I don't get that. They spend thousands of dollars on a studio.
Yeah. And now if you're like a Joe Rogan or somebody, and you're making this and you're doing like a video podcast with it as well, then maybe it's worth it to pay a little bit extra and do that. I mean, Joe Rogan, I think I heard last year he made like $30 million doing it. If you're making $30 million,
he better have a studio.
Yeah, spend the $600 for the microphone like he's using. But like I said, right now I'm sitting in front of my computer. I've got a $30 USB mic in front of me, and I'm running a free recording software, and that's what we use to do it.
Well, share which recording software.
So I'm using MP3 Skype Recorder, which is one of the options you can use to use on the PC. There's others like Ecamm Recorder, and one or two other big ones on Mac. But the MP3 Skype Recorder, the thing I don't love about it is I can't really control the levels, but all the levels that I've recorded with before have been fine. So, there's, as long as nothing's distorting, you'll be fine. But you can record 30 hours per month for free, and otherwise you have to upgrade to the Pro Edition, which I don't think costs much. I think it's a one-time fee, and I don't think it costs much. But I mean, that's it. That's all you really need. Aside to record it and make it. There's more involved in other places, but
I'll also say this, Adam. I was a guest on a podcast recently, and they published the episode. The audio quality was just fine for all of us, and the person who interviewed me, he didn't even use a microphone, and I had no idea. I couldn't tell, because nowadays the microphones that are built in to really Mac. I'm not sure about the Windows, but the microphones that are built into like these new iPads, these new MacBooks, they're like even better than the microphones that you can get for, $20-$25 on Amazon. Some of these microphones that I've seen people use, they're not even that good. Like the quality isn't that good. So if for whatever reason you can't afford the $35 microphone on Amazon, and I'll go ahead and tell you some of my favorite microphones. There's the Snowball, so Snowball microphone.
Yeah, that's a very common one, yeah.
Very common. And then there's the Audio Technica microphone. Those are probably the two most popular, and you can get both of them for like under $50. So even if you can't afford the $50, well, if you can get a nice Mac computer, which costs way more than $50, but look, Mac computers, they're worth it, man. Yeah. And if you spend the $900 or so on a Mac computer, that was like the latest version from 2020, there's a good chance that its built-in microphone is even better than what you would get from the Blue Snowball or Audio Technica. So there's the microphone, which we talked about, not a huge deal. Then there's also, you brought up Skype recorder. So I hope you all are taking notes on this. Or, of course, if you leave the review, I'll send you a free copy of the book, Podcastnomics, and everything's going to be right there. But you also brought up Skype. So, Adam, you and I are doing... We've done this entire podcast we've recorded through Skype.
Yep.
And the quality, I love Skype. I think the Skype quality is very strong. And when people ask, they're like, oh, Adam's in Texas and you're in Tampa. Like, how do you do this? And I say, oh, just through Skype. And they're like, really? Like, the audio is good? I'm like, you hear the podcast. Yeah. That's all Skype.
Yeah, your internet's good and Skype is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the great part is, as you start producing and mixing your podcast together, is you just want to make sure that your software that you're using records on 2 tracks. You want you on one track and your co-host or your guest on another track. And so you just want to make sure that whenever you do record whatever software, like this, that's one of the problems with Zoom, is from what I've seen, at least I've never done it personally, but the recordings that I've seen from Zoom have all been on one track. It might just be that the people aren't setting up their settings right. I don't know, but I can just tell you from past experience, Zoom records it all on one track. So just make sure when you are recording, if you want to be able to edit out, like if you're coughing in the background or you're typing on your keyboard to look something up while you're recording, or you drop something, you just want to be able to edit that out in the background. So just whatever software you get, just make sure that that's a possibility.
Well, why don't you tell us, Adam, what are the best audio editing softwares that podcasters should be using?
So if you're not sure if you're going to keep doing your podcast and you want to stay, on the low budget end, if you're on a PC, Audacity is the way to go. Audacity, yep. Audacity. That is a free software. It's very, very similar to Adobe Audition, which is what I use personally. And I have a subscription to the entire Adobe suite. If you just get Adobe Audition, I want to say it's like $20 a month for that. If you get the whole suite, it's like $50 a month, but that's only if you're going to be doing some graphic work or some video editing or some other stuff. I use the other stuff enough that it's worth it for me to spend the $50 a month. But if you're using a Mac, they usually come with GarageBand, and you can do that. Otherwise, the Adobe Suite works on Macs as well, so you can use that. And the great part is, if you have any questions about that, you can obviously reach out to us, hello@workfromhomeshow.com, or you can go to this really obscure website. It's called YouTube, and you can look up any issues you're having and learn about them there. I don't know if anybody's heard of YouTube, but it's a new thing.
It's pretty cool. I've learned a lot from it. I highly recommend it. And I personally have used both Audacity. In fact, you're the one who introduced me to Adobe Audition. Now it's not free. It can be quite pricey. So when I used to be a Windows user, I used Audacity for audio editing there. Then when I switched over to Mac, GarageBand is also free, comes with the Mac. so you can use GarageBand. So again, we talked about microphone is pretty much free. The audio editing is free. Skype is free. You use Skype Recorder, free. Now, Adam, let's talk
so
about...
I will say one thing more about the Adobe Suite is if you have a kid, or if you're, as long as they're over like 13, or if you know somebody who's a student, whether that's in high school or college, I'm not saying I've ever done this before, but they can subscribe to it and they have a student deal, and you can get everything, like the whole suite, for like $30 a month. So
that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
So that's good to know.
So that's like 40% off regular price.
That's good to know. Okay. So now let's move on. You have all the equipment. Let's move on to the bumper music. So you hear our bumper music at the beginning of every episode, and you hear that really cool guy with the deep voice talking about our show and saying our names. Now, bumper music, I use a website called Audio Jungle. So you can look it up, audiojungle.net. And they charge like anywhere from $1 a year to like $10 a year for the right to use this type of royalty-free.
Oh, you're getting ripped off.
Well, so Adam, yeah, you probably have a better solution than this.
So it's YouTube has a youtube.com/audio library/music is a collection of music on YouTube that is completely free, that doesn't, and most things you can sort it. Most things do not require attribution. And so they're just music that people are putting up there and telling YouTube anybody can use this. And so that's where I found all of the the music for our intro and the little sting that you hear at the end. And I mean, there's a ton of music on there. There's all sorts of different like feels. There's all sorts of different lengths, from like 5 seconds to 5 minutes, 6 minutes. So I mean, the YouTube audio library was a boon for me whenever I started using it.
Okay, so YouTube wins. Yeah. YouTube definitely wins because
when
there's way more.
When Podcastnomics was written, I don't think it existed.
Yeah, it did not exist. So share that site again, Adam. Where can people go to get the royalty-free music? Yeah,
well, you can just search Audio Library YouTube, but the web address is youtube.com/audiolibrary/music.
Okay. So that's where you want to get your bumper music for sure. I think that makes sense. So again, free. Don't you love free? I know I do. Voiceovers. Now, you can, if you have a friend who has a nice voice and you can get them to do it for free, do you a favor. It takes all of 30 seconds to record, maybe a minute. So go right ahead.
It probably costs you about a 6-pack of beer.
Yeah. Well, I used somebody who I found on the internet. You can go to Upwork or Fiverr. So I paid, I want to say, like less than $10 for our voiceover guy, who's a professional. He is an absolute. He does voiceovers for some of the largest radio stations and movie trailers in the country, and I hired him for like $8 to do our intro voiceover. So,
speaking of not knowing your worth, apparently.
It seems like a lot of people tend to lose sight of their worth once they start negotiating with me. But anyway, that's another story. So you can try to hire all these. There are lots of expensive people out there who will charge, and this is what we used to do back before all these sites came up, like Upwork and Fiverr. We used to pay people $100, $150 just to do a simple 10-second voiceover. Mm-hmm. But now, all these great technology has really deflated the space, and so the going rate has gone down tremendously. So this isn't quite cheap. Actually, this can be free. It's not free. All the other stuff we've told you has been free. This one is not quite free, but it can be if you happen to if you get your friend to do it, or if you just do it.
It's basically free. $8.
It's basic.
You're basically free.
Yeah, it's basically free. Gonna have to give up that Subway footlong for lunch tomorrow. All right, so the next tool that I want to share is, let's go with, how about hosting? So now you have all the equipment, you know how to do the interview, you know how to record, you know how to edit the audio. Well, how can I take my podcast live? How can I track stats? How can I upload episodes? How can I promote it? I'll tell you, I've used a lot of different hosting providers. So you're going to have to use a hosting provider. And there are many ones out there. I'm going to name some names. The most popular one is called Libsyn, which is what we use here. It's what I've been using since 2012. It's the largest podcasting hosting provider in the world. But there's also SoundCloud, which has actually started to phase that out because SoundCloud is in huge debt. They're in big trouble. There's also Blueberry, which I've used before. And now there's a new one called Anchor. I don't know if you've heard of it, Adam.
I've heard of it. I've never used it. I think it's free, isn't it?
It's free. It's free. And it's an app that you can download on your phone. And you can literally produce your entire podcast from your phone. You can record. You can bring on a guest, record it. You can edit using that Anchor app. You can publish it, and it goes out to iTunes and all the different publishers. It's actually pretty cool. It's a really cool idea, and it's catching on very quickly. And Spotify just bought it, like I want to say 2 or 3 months ago.
Wow.
Spotify bought Anchor because Spotify is trying to become a huge player in the podcast space. Huh. So, look, I would say just try it out. Try out Anchor. It's free. Download the app. And it may not be for you. It may not. And if it's not for you, pay the $5, $7, $15 a month for Libsyn. That's what we use for this podcast. Right now we're paying $15 a month during season 1. And then when we take a break between season 1 and season 2, we're only going to be paying $5 a month. And then when we start season 2 back up, we're going to go right back up to $15 a month.
Yeah. Now let's explain why. So the reason there's different tiers is they allow you to upload a certain amount of data per month. So you're paying for uploading episodes per month, but the reason we can drop back down afterwards is they don't charge you for previous months that you've uploaded stuff. So, we had to up it from, I think, 50 megabytes, that was the lowest plan, to 250 megabytes because we're actually publishing episodes. We're publishing enough that it took up space. But once we're not uploading stuff, if we're only uploading one a month or, one a week even, then we can drop it down because we won't need the space. But we won't lose all of the old episodes. And that's one thing, we talked about Anchor and some of the other ones, like there's Podbean that's free. Some of the things that the one thing that would concern me about Anchor is the fact that you're doing it all on the app and on the phone through their system, is you might be giving up control, and you want to be sure that you have all of your audio files, because if you ever want to go somewhere else, if you want to change your host platform, if you don't have control of your audio files, you could be out of luck. I mean, you might just end up being out of luck. So control your audio, because that's the lifeblood of your podcast, obviously.
Yes. So try them both. Try Anchor, try Libsyn if you want to start out with like the $5 a month subscription. I've been using Libsyn since I started podcasting. I think what separates Libsyn from the others is the stats. So with Libsyn, if you are on the $7 a month plan or above, you get stats. You get what countries are listening to you, how many people are listening to you. You're not necessarily getting all those quantifiable, specific data and stats from the free services out there. So again, just go with whatever you're comfortable with. Try them both out and pick what you think is best. what I like about Libsyn on top of the stats is now they have these partnerships with distribution networks. So they have like a partnership with Spotify and with SoundCloud and YouTube and Facebook and Radio Public and radio.com, and you literally like just check a box to get your podcast hosted or to be promoted on these different platforms.
Yeah, anywhere that you're using that you hear our show, we only upload to Libsyn. You know, if you're listening to this on YouTube or Facebook or anywhere else, we only upload to one place.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. So we upload everything to Libsyn, and then Libsyn, they disseminate it to all these different places. Now, I will say I had to do a decent amount of work to get us on additional outlets, like, you know, creating the SoundCloud username and password and linking the accounts and TuneIn and Stitcher and creating the YouTube account and the Facebook account and creating all these different accounts, the social media accounts, but also getting us listed on like Player.fm, because Libsyn does not have a partnership with Player.fm, and they do not have a partnership with TuneIn or Stitcher. So I had to go out and do that myself. But still, Libsyn does have the relationships with like iHeartRadio and the other platforms that I mentioned.
Yeah, and every time that somebody from, you know, Player.fm, as soon as they start playing the audio file, it's the audio file that Libsyn hosts, so Libsyn counts that in the stats. So when you're going and looking at your stats, it doesn't matter where they played it. When they accessed the file that Libsyn had stored in our system, you know, we get the stat.
Yep, exactly. So let's see. Are there any other? This is kind of the bare bones software stuff. There are other things which we're not going to go over on this episode, like transcripts. But basically, we've shared, and we've done 2 episodes on this. The first was, is podcasting worth it as an undertaking? And now in this episode, it's the software and technology and the equipment. But in conclusion, the total startup cost, we just shared all these expenses with you. And the total startup cost, this is why I said, we're talking $150, $200. And we should mention, this is including if you want to create your own website. So we always plug our workfromhomeshow.com website. So you can create your own website, or you can hire, like Adam, you can contact us, hello@workfromhomeshow.com, and get Adam to create your website for you. And we could certainly do that, or Adam could certainly do that.
Yeah, or you can just go around doing like a Wix site or something like that, and not pay for it, and do it that way. Especially, I mean, my suggestion would be, if you're doing this on a real shoestring budget, just make the Wix site, make the Square. I don't know if you have to pay for Squarespace, but do something that's free or dirt cheap, and see if you're going to stick with it. And then if you are, then upgrade. But especially as we're talking about just getting started, get started as cheap as possible. You can always upgrade later.
Yep, I completely agree. And the total cost to do all this, again, it's like $100. This is you don't need to go out and raise funding. That's absolutely ridiculous. But I want to reiterate, you must have the website. It's not good enough just to go on Anchor and create a podcast on Anchor, or just to be on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, or to just depend on Libsyn to distribute the podcast for you. You absolutely need to take control of your podcast, and you need to have a website and post a podcast there, because then the guests who you bring on your show, they're going to promote that link on your website. It's great for your SEO. Google's going to pick up on it. Google's not going to pick up on all these other platforms, because Apple Podcasts app is completely different from Google. It's very different. So it actually, Google probably won't even pick it up, because you have to go through the app to subscribe to the podcast, or you have to go through the iTunes store to subscribe to the podcast. So absolutely, you want to have a website.
Yeah, and let's be very clear. iTunes is about 75 to 80% of the podcast market.
Yep.
I mean, that's whether that's Apple Podcast or straight up using iTunes. That's if you're only going to put your podcast on one platform, make sure you submit it to iTunes. I mean, I'm sure pretty much everybody listening could have guessed that, but it's however big you think iTunes is, it's bigger than that.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. So I think these are the two most important topics when launching a podcast. So I want to just quickly go over some small things. Oh, actually, no, they're big things, but we can answer them in like quick 1 or 2 sentences. So the format of your show, look, just listen to other podcasts, steal some ideas, try to emulate your podcast after other shows that you might hear. Bring guests on your show. That's certainly an idea. If you want to go that route, maybe you have more of an editorial, well-produced podcast, like an investigative podcast where you don't need guests. It's not like a talk show. But if you do have a talk show, having guests is great because you bring someone else into the picture. Your listeners, they get tired of hearing you. So bring someone else in, bring a different voice, another expert who you can interview and bring unique insight. And it's great for search engine optimization. If they are obviously the bigger name the guest, the better for your show. Google's going to pick up on all that. Then there's also podcast marketing. I have an entire cheat sheet on podcast. In fact, we've already shared like most of the cheat sheet here on this episode. So my recommendation would just be leave that review on iTunes and get a copy of my book, Podcastnomics, so you have access to that cheat sheet. And the final kind of idea or topic that I want to quickly run through are revenue drivers for your podcast. So we talked about how do you decide whether a podcast is a worthwhile undertaking? Well, now I want to talk about 3 primary revenue drivers, which is number 1, which is
hang on before we get started on that. You mentioned having guests, and people might be asking, "Oh, well, how do I find guests?" And I think you're the one who told me this. Basically, if you want to find guests, pick a topic, go on Amazon, type in the topic, and see who the authors are who pop up, and then talk to them.
Oh, excellent point that you bring up, and that is one strategy I use to bring in guests. So we talked about Star Wars, right? So if you just go on Amazon Books and type in Star Wars, you'll probably, because there's so many books on Star Wars, you'll have to go to like page 4 or page 5 to start finding like independent authors who are, writing their own Star Wars stories or whatever. And those are people who you can contact and bring on the show. And so you can usually they have an author page that has a website or an email address, and you can just contact them through there. Another way you can get guests is doing the same thing, except through your Apple Podcasts or iTunes app. So you just pull up Apple Podcasts, you type in your like keyword for your topic, and you can then see all the other podcasts that are in your space and who they've interviewed. And so there are a bunch of guests just right there. Oh, okay, this is a competitor podcast. They've interviewed all these people. I can bring them on too. I've been able to get some huge name guests for clients over the past 13 years. That's simply because I've also developed relationships with publicists and book promoters. So that's much harder to do. The easy thing to do, like you said, Adam, just go to Amazon or iTunes, type in the topic, and you can see a list of experts and authors right there.
Sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, no, you didn't cut me off. That was a great point that you bring up. And like I said, it's impossible for us to cover everything on these 2 episodes that we're doing. It's all in detail in my book, Podcastnomics. So finally, revenue drivers for your podcast. Number 1, of course, the old school way is the advertising. That's what people always ask me first. Oh, are you going to get sponsors for your show? Are you going to get advertisers? Look, you can certainly do that. It's hard to do. If you're depending on advertising to fund your show, you might be disappointed.
Yeah, good luck.
But it is, good luck. We've already said that. Good luck. So that's one way you can make money. The second one is the most popular way, and that is selling an existing product. So that's using podcasting as a lead generator to funnel in leads so that you can sell them something. What you sell them, it could be like your book, like my books. It could be our consulting services, like Adam, your websites. It could be my Christian media and marketing stuff. It could be whatever it is that your business sells. If you're an accountant and you want to sell your accounting services, or you can sell other people's products. So I know a lot of podcasts that do that. They start a podcast, they get an audience, and then they just start doing deals with other companies and selling their products and working out a deal with them. So that's the most common, most popular way to monetize a podcast. Adam, any thoughts on that?
The important thing is, though, whenever you go around and you're monetizing it that way, especially if you're doing, deals, like we talked about how we were talking about why you want to be on our mailing list. And the important thing is just when you go out there and you find deals and you're going to, make money off of it, just make sure that the things you're providing to your listeners are actually, that you're trying to sell them, will actually benefit them. You just got to ask yourself that every time is, am I doing this to make money, or am I doing this because these things are actually going to help my listeners?
I'll tell you, Adam, in general, I only promote things that I personally use, that I like using myself.
Yeah.
And that's why, I promoted Uber Eats and Instacart and DoorDash because I use them, and my wife and I, we love it. It's of huge benefit to us, and that's why we're recommending it to our listeners.
Yep.
It's just way better when you do it that way.
And it establishes the trust that you need to have with your listeners, too.
Yep, exactly. So that the third revenue driver, which is not as popular these days, and that is the paid podcast content. So that's essentially where you don't have the free stuff, you have a paywall. And again, Libsyn, they've integrated a paid podcast section, so you can just do this all through Libsyn, or you can do it yourself through a website, like a subscription type of website, where you charge people, hey, you have to pay $5 a month in order to get access to this content, or you charge an annual fee in order to get access to special content. So we have clients who have the premium paid podcast content, and they pay X amount of dollars per year. They're part of an exclusive club or an exclusive circle to get this paid content. So that's one way that you can, imagine having 1,000 listeners and you're able to charge $10 a month and 100 of them sign up. Well, you're making $1,000 a month off the podcast.
Yeah.
Not that bad.
Yeah.
Not
there's
bad.
also, the other way you can do that, it's similar, is the one where people can donate to your podcast.
Patreon.
Yeah, Patreon. Thank you. That's the name of it. That's not really a great way of going around making money on it, but it is an option. And especially if you're doing this as a potential hobby, that's probably the better route to take.
Yeah, so Patreon is like you said, it's kind of like a donation service for podcasts.
It's the NPR of podcasting.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I it's good that we brought it up because Patreon has become very, very popular in podcasting. And I have never personally donated through Patreon, but I know some podcasters who actually make good money off of the donations. So good for them. And Adam, that just about covers it. In 2 episodes, we covered how to podcast, how to do it from beginning to end. So again, I want to tell listeners again, visit workfromhomeshow.com, get on the mailing list. Not only are you going to get a free copy of 50 Shades of Marketing, but now if you leave that review on whatever podcasting platform you use to listen to our show, leave that review, send us a screenshot, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. Send that screenshot and you will get a free copy of my first book I ever wrote and #1 best-selling book, my most popular book, Podcastnomics, the book of podcasting to make you millions. It's a supplement or a complement to what you heard on these last 2 episodes. So highly, highly recommend it. It's free. We basically said that podcasting is almost free. Getting up and running, almost free. So Adam, any final thoughts?
Just know you can do it. Don't make it harder than it needs to be.
People think it is really hard. It's not. I'm telling you, if Adam and I can get up and running in one business day, you can get up and running in 1 month at the latest.
Yeah.
At the latest.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, homies, homegirls, homeboys, home trans, all the homies out there, thank you all for tuning in to our podcast, the Work From Home Show. And until next time, keep on working from home.